Yeah, I heard that part. Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Director Cody,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Zimmer,
Here.
Chair O'Hilsky,
Present.
all present.
Okay, so just for everybody's information right now, after we do the resolution for the teleconferencing, I'm going to move item 9C to be the item after that because it's the executive director's contract transfer, and I'd like to get that done at the beginning of the meeting so there's no question about him being the executive director today. So let's move on to number 3, please. This should be fairly straightforward. It's just the monthly resolution we need to do to authorize the remote teleconferencing. Daniel, do you want to speak in about this a little bit?
Not necessarily, like you said, it's very similar to the previous resolution that was adopted by the BMC that allows us to continue meeting remotely under AB 361, I believe.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions before we go to public comment? Okay, seeing none, Laura, let's go to public comment, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, *9, and if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Patrick McGibney, Chair of the Los Osos Sustainability Group. This afternoon, at the Coastal Commission hearing, we're appealing another county-sanctioned ADU. This one was outside the prohibition zone. The applicant has spent over $10,000 in fees and waivers
Patrick, I hate to interrupt you, but this is agenda item is in regards to the remote teleconferencing meetings.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Well, there will be another opportunity for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments by the members of the committee? Okay, seeing none, can we have a motion, please?
This is Mark. I'd like to make a motion to authorize the resolution to continue remote teleconferencing for this BMC meeting.
Second, please.
This is Cody. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can you take a roll call, Laura? There's a resolution.
I'll do the roll call.
Sorry, my mistake. I'm sorry.
No problem. Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair O'Hilsky.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to 9C, please. Thank you, Laura. There's been a request by Daniel for us to transfer the contract from our current contractor to which is Water Systems Consulting Incorporated, to Confluence Engineering Solutions, Inc., or provide, that's the request. So we can either do that or provide alternative direction to staff. So if you look in the staff report, it's pretty short and simple to the point. It says Daniel is no longer employed by WSC and has formed a new company called Confluence Engineering Solutions. WSC has expressed a willingness to transfer the executive director contract to Confluence. Mr. Heimel has requested that the contract be transferred from WSC to Confluence's. And then there's a scope of the work from Confluence's attached to that staff report thing. And then he says BMC party staff discussed the situation at their last meeting and supports the transfer of the contract to Daniel based on his past performance and experience. So that's it. And the financial consideration is he would provide the services of the executive director within the remaining budget services in calendar year 2021 at a rate of $200 per hour, which represents a reduced hourly rate for the ED services. And then, so that's pretty much it. And then the scope of work is attached to the staff report. So I don't know if anybody else has, or pardon me, if anybody has any questions. So I'm just providing the staff report since Daniel would be a little, may seem to be biased. So I'm doing it as an objective party here. So do we have any questions from the board members? Or the committee
Thanks,
members?
Marshall. This is Mark. I just have a question. Or a comment first, I guess. So this is to continue the contract for 2021 and then extend the contract to 2022. And so in the cost savings of $25 an hour is for the remainder of this year. And then I see that there's a budget item of $70,000 in 2022. Is there projected a cost savings there also or not? And I'd just like a little bit more clarity on what his 2022 contract would include or not include compared to previous services.
Thank you, Mark. Daniel, would you like to respond to that, please, since I don't have that background knowledge?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yes, Director Zimmer, the rate of $200 an hour would continue into calendar year 2022. And the scope of services that would be provided in calendar year 2022 is included in the agenda packet. A couple of things to note that are different from the original scope of services that was prepared for the executive director. We've increased the number of BMC meetings to an assumption of 8 per year to 10, based off just the past recent history where we seem to be having and needing to have more meetings throughout the year. So that's an increase in the level of effort. The other thing that's included in there that wasn't in the original scope of services is the BMC party staff meetings. We've been having it monthly, if not more frequently, the monthly party staff meetings to help coordinate and collaborate on BMC initiatives amongst the BMC party staff. And so the budget estimate for calendar year 2022 is proposed at $70,000, the same as it was for 2021. But the intent would be that more work and it could be completed within that budget because of the reduced hourly rate that would be provided in 2022 as well.
Right. And so the scope of work that's provided in this report is very similar. When I read through it, it looks very similar to the previous scope of work. Has anything changed? Is there anything that you want to identify that's changed there, or is it pretty much the exact same scope of work that was in the WSC contract?
The only real two changes that were included were the increase in the assumed number of BMC meetings per year from 8 to 10, and then the addition of just a scope item for the BMC party staff meetings that wasn't previously explicitly included in the WSC scope.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And then as far as the invoicing procedure, are you going to invoice on this hourly rate, or is it kind of broken down into a monthly service type invoicing where you're simply dividing the 70,000 by a monthly rate?
The intent is to continue invoicing based on the hourly rate. The contract is treated as a time and materials not to exceed contract. And so, as effort is done, that time is tracked and then invoiced at the end of the month. If the level of effort is less than the anticipated budget, then those savings, those costs would not be passed on to the BMC parties, as it is a time and materials based contract.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dan. And so, I support you maintaining the executive director role. Just want to make a comment. You've done a good job for us. I appreciate you your dedication to the BMC and all of your significant input and expertise is well noted. So appreciate having you here and would like to continue seeing you be the executive director.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have any other do we have any other committee comments before I go to public comment? Okay, seeing none, Laura, let's go to public comment.
If you'd like to make a public
on
comment
item
on
nine.
agenda item 9C, please
Thank you.
raise your hand, or if you're on your phone, star 9. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, is there any further discussion or can we have a motion?
I'll move approval of staff's recommendation. That's Bruce.
Cody will second that motion.
Okay, you're talking about approval of the recommendation number 1, which consider the transfer of executive director contract from Water Systems Consulting to Confluent Engineering Solutions, Inc.
I
Correct?
will more than consider it. I will move it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I will second that proposed motion.
Okay, can we take a roll call? I don't think we should have Daniel do that. I'll do it because, okay, I'll take a roll call. Supervisor Gibson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes,
Mr. Zimmer,
Yes.
Mr. Ohilsky, yes. Okay, the item passes unanimously. Okay, so now we can go back to the regular order of the the meeting. And I would like to just comment in agreement with everybody that Daniel's done an excellent job to this point. So I mean, his involvement with the parties and all that stuff has just been tremendous. Okay, so item number 4, which is board member comments. If you have a comment on something that's not on the agenda, please let us know. If not, we'll move on to the next item. So do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda? Or not public, committee comments, pardon me.
no,
No for Mark.
Nothing from me.
Okay, we'll move on then, Laura. We have no special presentations, so the consent agenda. Do we have any questions or discussions about that item?
yes, this is Cody from S&T. I do on this item 9, the meeting minutes, I think there's a slight, possibly not an error, but an omission on the part where let's see. We approved the 8A, sustainable yield discussions. There's no mention. It says that we unanimously approved the proposal, but there was no mention that we removed the last paragraph of that proposal from the motion to approve. And that last paragraph, if I have that in front of me now, if you don't mind me reading that, it just says that it is additionally recommended that, if the BMC agrees upon a sustainable yield for 2022 estimate, that a sustainable yield for 2021 estimate could be calculated using the same methodology and key assumptions for use in the 2021 AMR Basin yield metric. In a discussion when the motion was being made, we decided to remove that last paragraph from the motion.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Does anybody have any comments on that item or any other item before I go to public comment?
That's familiar. I don't have any objection to that, although, in terms of the action, it was on the sustainable yield. So I'm fine if that needs to be noted or something.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to public comment, Laura, on item 6.
If you'd like to
Consent
make a
agenda.
public comment on the consent agenda, which is the approval of minutes, please dial *9 if you're on your computer or raise your hand. All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you and good afternoon. Just on the consent agenda, a couple of comments. First, my name is spelled wrong again. It's just like it sounds with one I and one E, so I'd appreciate that change. I also wanted to check on when you plan to schedule the discussion on the transcripts of the minutes. I think that you voted to have that discussion, correct? So I don't think that should be put off any longer. There are important meetings happening now and coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to also see that discussion about the having the meeting transcripted be brought back forward. I would like to remind you that we do not pay for live meetings anymore. So there's an excess of money sitting aside that has been saved. And I personally think that should be directed to make it much clearer. And I think it's way better for the record and for the public to have a full transcript of the meeting. And so I encourage that. And I appreciate also Director Cody's suggestion that we not approve the minutes until that sentence was removed, because it could change a lot in the future. So that's it.
Okay, thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, so let's bring this back. First, do you guys want to bring this telescribing back as a future agenda item? Or transcripting, pardon me. You want to have Daniel look into that in more detail, or what do you guys want to do?
No, this is Bruce. I don't see the utility of that. Our official record of our meeting is the recording. We have action minutes. That's consistent with what the Board of Supervisors does, and I think that's more than adequate.
Yeah, there's one, potential, I'm sorry, the omission that I brought up earlier about action item 8A on last month's meeting minutes is an example of a potential mistake that could be made where there would be a conflict between the recording of the meeting and then what was transcribed in the minutes that would have been important. The same kind of transcription errors can happen too, of course.
Okay. All right, well, the second item then is, so do we want to have a motion to approve the minutes with that deletion that Charlie brought up?
Yeah. I'll make a motion. Well, let me make a comment on the transcription first. I'm in agreement with Supervisor Gibson about the transcription and taking the time to do that. My recommendation is that we don't do the transcription. So that's my comment right there. But and then as far as the motion, I'd make a motion to include Charlie's comment to remove about removing of the last paragraph to note that and document that was removed.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
second that. This is Bruce. I'll second it.
May we have a motion and a second? Any further comments?
So if I understand correctly, the motion is to accept the minutes as written with the one exception that we should add for action item 8A, that the last paragraph was removed from the recommendation.
Correct. With the minutes will be approved with the deletion of that portion.
Very good.
Okay, can we take a vote, please? Daniel?
Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, so now we'll go to public comments for items not on the agenda. Oops.
Marshall, just one thought. So with respect to the transcripts, I believe that the direction at the last meeting was to bring back the transcripts and a formal cost estimate for the BMC to consider at a future BMC meeting. I did not have time to solicit proposals for the development of transcripts and to bring that back to the BMC for consideration at this meeting. But I would like some clarification on it. I guess the intent would be to bring that back to the BMC for consideration at the December meeting as part of the budget review and approval for calendar year 2022. But I guess I'd like to get some clarity on that, given some of the comments that were provided at this meeting.
All right, yeah, Mark and Bruce and Charlie, I could go either way on that, so I'm not a definer in this one. So what do you three guys think?
I find no harm. This is Cody from S&T. No harm in soliciting some proposals, quotations for that and bringing it back.
And this is Bruce. I see no benefit in creating transcripts when we have the official recording as the official record. Any, corrections like the one we just made can be made off of that if we need to do it, which is rare, I think. And I don't think we need to spend a BMC meeting time debating that question.
Yeah, this is Mark. I just didn't see the need either, and really not aware that, it's normal practice for an agency like ours to provide a transcript of every meeting. So just didn't think we needed to focus in on that action.
Okay, so we don't
So
have.
one thing I'd like to point out, I think, I don't know that we can actually take action on transcripts necessarily, but I believe we can get direction to staff for how to proceed with transcripts.
Right, and you have.
I have direction to bring transcripts back as a formal agenda item from the last meeting.
And now you have direction for the opposite.
And I'll be happy to make a motion to clarify direction if that's necessary. But Marshall, what are your feelings? I think we can drop the subject at this point.
I agree with Mark and Bruce at this point in time.
I think that seems like clear enough direction, doesn't it, Dan, that we don't need to bring this forward.
I don't know that you can actually vote to make a vote on that today without it being agendized.
No,
Right, correct. It's just a discussion.
No, it's staff direction. We're directing staff not to prioritize this, not to bring a discussion of transcripts forward. So that we can do at any point.
Okay. All right. Then let's move on to item number 7. Public comments on items not appearing on the agenda. Again, this is for items not on the agenda.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. And if you wrote a question in the question and answer, I will read it at the end. All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Deborah Howe with the Los Osos Community Advisory Council Water Ad Hoc Committee. I do have a question. It appears that the county has opened a new department, the Groundwater Sustainability Department, and hired a consultant to work as the sole employee for that department. My question is, as a county employee, will Mr. Reilly, I believe is his name, be available to consult with the BMC? And also, will the Los Osos community receive any benefit from this newly formed groundwater sustainability department? That is my question.
Thank you, Deborah. Any other comments? Oh, yes.
Keith, you
We'll
just have
answer
to
your
unmute yourself.
Deborah, we'll answer your question after all of the public comment.
Thank you, Keith Weimer. And I assume your changes to the minutes includes spelling my name correctly. I'm again requesting that the BMC provides a presentation on the PFASs. These are the cancer-causing forever chemicals, and how the BMC will address them. Once again, this should happen as soon as possible. I believe there are all indications are that it will be a rapidly developing issue. I'm sure people saw the article about Atascadero and their problems and their decision to sue some of the companies that produce those. You'll need to be very proactive, I believe, in order to protect the basin and the public, so I encourage that. I wanted to clarify too that the LOSG is opposed to defining the sustainable yield as current condition, where seawater intrusion fronts are believed to be now. I got pretty excited about the fact that you did change the definition and reduce the sustainable yield. I may have been misunderstood last meeting. As I mentioned a few meetings ago, current conditions don't fit the accepted definition of sustainable yield. And because they are not desirable, seawater intrusion fronts in zone D and E are impacting or threatening private and community supply wells and are too far inland based on available data to represent a sustainable condition. The sustainable yield should be defined as a yield that moves the fronts offshore to preserve wells and support basin resilience, given the worsening climate change impacts on the basin and on local and state water supplies. We simply can't count on imported water in the future. And the BMC needs to plan and take actions based on the assumption that our basin will be our only water source, which means being precautionary in your approach to sustainable yield and objectives and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just remind the BMC that at the last meeting, your minutes did state that you wanted to have Dan bring back the minutes, and that was direction that was given. So the reason also stated on the last minutes that we had that were transcribed, it said that the problem with recorded minutes is nobody spends the time listening to them, and the problem with transcribed minutes is that it holds you responsible and accountable. Again, my name is Patrick McGibney. I'm the chair of the Los Osos Community Group. This afternoon, the Coastal Commission hearing, we were appealing another county-sanctioned ADU. This one was outside the prohibition zone. The applicant has spent over $10,000 in fees and waivers to become compliant with the county's requirements. In other words, they jumped through all the hoops and hurdles that are required. Yet the county knows that it's questionable whether our basin has a sustainable water supply for the current population and that these projects will be appealed, causing hardships for the applicants. This committee is complicit in these actions, but by not demanding that the county stop promoting and issuing additional water demanding building permits. This is the community's water. Your job is to manage it in a sustainable way, not allow its exploitation by the county. People suffer through these actions. We recognize you have little power over land use decisions by the county, but just by being the Basin Management Committee, you become complicit in any county actions that further degrade our basin unless you take a hard stand on opposing them. There's a fine line between cooperatively working with the county and being intimidated and manipulated by the county. A good example is the lack of metering on agricultural and private wells. We know you have stated you're in favor of such metering, but have you written to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Coastal Commission, or the courts asking for intervention to require metering? Because as everyone knows, you can't monitor what you don't meter. The county has stonewalled you on these kinds of actions by using hyperboil and warnings, of dire consequences. The community needs strong and committed basin management. The purveyors need cooperative management from the county, and it's up to them to get it. The community and the sustainability group stand with the purveyors in this effort. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again, Lindy Owen. I feel terribly uncomfortable with that last decision by Supervisor Gibson to not even look at a study of what it would cost to do full transcripts. And I have to agree with Patrick. At the very fact that at the same time that Mr. Gibson is saying that we don't need those, we just caught a pretty serious error in the minutes. It shouldn't be up to the public to go back and find this. If they have a transcript and can read it, it's all there for all of us to know. The professionalism is lacking when you sit and make a decision to just go ahead and ignore the public's request to even look at what it would cost to do full transcripts. And I just don't think Mr. Gibson has, they have a vested interest. The county is the only one that's pushing for growth in this basin. I just don't respect his stance. I'm sorry. I want to know who pays for basin management in other basins that aren't adjudicated yet. Is the county currently paying for all of that? And again, I'm curious about Deborah's question about the County Groundwater Sustainability Department being established, if they'll have any say in what we're doing. And lastly, the question of imported water. That tells me that this isn't a sustainable basin at this point. There should be no discussion about that if we have more water than we know what to do with. So obviously, getting the wells metered will tell us what we have. Not metering them is irresponsible also. So I really hope, and again, Regional Water Quality Control Board should come in and look at the nitrate pollution that's in one area has been increasing. That's something that this board should be pressing to have looked at, because that affects that amount of water that we might have been able to use, but because of the high nitrate pollution, we need to know if that's resolvable by putting some of those Cabrillo estates, for instance, and some of the horse farms onto the sewer so that we can know where the nitrate removal is happening, because it's currently not happening, it's increasing. That's not good. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindy.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I have to say I'm tiring of the sustainability group's drone with this Chicken Little narrative about having enough water for the existing community. It's just so off base, and the idea that the sustainability group has become really a vexatious appellant on county approved projects. I wonder if they know that the secondary dwelling unit that's in front of the Coastal Commission today that they cited has to retrofit at 2-to-1, just like a regular single family home for their 1,200 square foot secondary unit. So, you know, there's a complete absence of historical perspective on the part of these folks. They fail to mention that the purveyors have reduced pumping by over 500 acre feet per year in the last 10 years. In 2010, the total extractions by purveyors was about 1,620 acre feet. And today it's 1,060 acre feet. So with the absence of a historical perspective in this Chicken Little mentality, again, it's just getting old, the drone of it, the noise of it. And if these folks actually did their homework, they might understand that these projects being approved by the county have absolutely no impact on the reliability of our water supply or the purveyor's ability to supply existing customers. it's really pathetic, frankly. And I, for one, am over this drone on their part. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, there are a couple comments that were written in on the question and answer from Judy West. She writes, having a green golf course, sea pines, and a shrinking water basin is the definition of insanity. Per last meeting, the golf course receives 750,000 gallons a day. How much of our gray water goes to the golf course, and shouldn't it go back into the basin to replenish our aquifer? Virginia Jensen writes, unmetered wells are using unknown quantities of water. The level of the aquifer is not measured. Is it possible that we can run out of water in the very near future? Vic writes, I prefer transcription to recordings. Both would be best for transparency. Why not both? And that's the end of public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Laura. All right, Daniel, would you like to answer the questions? I know that Deborah had a question.
Yeah, actually, I'd probably defer that question to Director Gibson or another county representative.
Yep. Happy to, Mr. Chairman. It's your pleasure.
Yes, that's fine, Bruce. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was a decision of the majority of the Board of Supervisors that the responsibility for groundwater management, which is predominantly the basins that are covered by SGMA, but in fact, practically includes all basins, including Los Osos, and it's a adjudicated part. We're going to be transferred to a separate, I guess it's a department or a division that's housed in our admin office, separate from our public works. And again, this is a decision I did not agree with because it quite frankly divorces our management of groundwater from the expertise that's been developed over many years within our Public Works Water Resources Division. But nonetheless, so it occurs. The department head was hired, Mr. Blaine Reilly, and directors will perhaps recall he interviewed for the executive director's position of the BMC, experienced water hydrologist. And it's a little bit early to tell, but the likelihood is that Mr. Reilly is going to be managing consultant contracts for management of the SGMA basins. That's, again, not completely determined yet, but that seemed to be the desire of the majority of the Board of Supervisors. They thought somehow they could do this less expensively and in some way more to their liking if that were the mode. For Los Osos, it's not exactly clear what the county's support of the BMC is going to look like. I've got a meeting scheduled in the coming days or weeks with Mr. Reilly to talk about it. And we'll see exactly how that sorts out. So it will be some level of change. Again, don't know exactly how. There had been a question as to who is paying for all this. Again, by decision of the board majority, the general taxpayer has been paying for the management of all the SGMA basins, and the general fund of the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control Water Conservation District has been paying its share of the BMC expenses under adjudication. I think the long-term plan, certainly my vision of the long-term plan, is that the beneficiaries of the resources of a basin should be paying for its management. And there is a fee study underway in the Paso Robles Basin. I think one is going to be framed up fairly soon for the San Luis Obispo Valley, which is basically the Edna Valley water basin south and east of the city of San Luis Obispo. And we've talked for some time about that. And I think we're going to see that happen here for the adjudicated part of Los Osos. So, you know, the next year will be telling. Will continue to advocate for the best possible county support for the program of the BMC. And we're just going to have to see what that looks like after we've had a chance to sort it out.
All right, thank you for that detailed answer. Daniel, do you have any other comments on any other questions?
I don't recall that there were other necessarily specific questions, but you know, there were a number of comments from the public on items or initiatives that, you know, they would like to see the BMC focus on with its efforts. And so I guess just kind of a general comment I would make is that, you know, as we're preparing reviewing a potential proposed budget for calendar year 2022, you know, we'll be looking for input from the BMC on what are the specific focus areas that they'd like to see BMC staff and or BMC resources put towards in the upcoming year. And so I think that would be a good opportunity, as we'll get to later in the agenda, to provide direction to staff on how to focus its efforts moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So we'll close this item and move on to the executive director's report, which we did not have last meeting because of the length of the meeting. So Daniel, we'll turn it over to you as our I don't want to say new executive director, but our rehired, however you want to put it. So thank you.
Thank you, Marshall. Yes, executive director's report. Again, as usual, I'll focus on the items that have changed that we have updates from. Some of the updates are from the executive director's report that were included in the last agenda packet. Some of the items have been updated based on new information that's been obtained since our last meeting. So I'll walk through that. Kind of the first updates, and it's a little bit of a rehash of our last meeting, but you know, kind of an update of the status of BMC initiatives. First, you know, as we mentioned earlier in review of the minutes, the BMC unanimously approved a sustainable yield estimate of 2,380 acre feet for calendar year 2022. And these actions will be described in the 2021 annual report. With respect to the recycled water beneficial use evaluation, this initiative is currently on hold, but is anticipated that the scope of work for that initiative will be included in the water recycling funding program grant initiative that hopefully we'll be embarking on in 2022. With respect to the transient groundwater model, at the October 27th meeting, the BMC authorized preparation of a grant application for $150,000 in grant funding and to request access to $150,000 in funding that the county budgeted for the development of a transient model. So those efforts are underway. Again, at the October 27th meeting, the BMC authorized Twin Cities Survey and Cleeth Harris geologists to survey additional wells in the basin to improve our groundwater monitoring program. And then finally, at the October 27th meeting, the BMC authorized Cleeth Harris geologists to perform an evaluation of potential opportunities to modify existing wells or construct new or multiple new monitoring wells to improve monitoring in the zone D of the lower aquifer. So we'll continue to provide updates on those initiatives as we move forward. With respect to basin plan implementation and funding plans, at the October 27th meeting, the BMC approved a proposal from SCI Consultants to provide an updated funding options analysis and assessment evaluation to help better inform the BMC of its options for developing a potential alternative funding mechanism, either for ongoing BMC basin monitoring and management, or for potential implementation of future basin plan programs. BMC legal counsel There have been a number of recent discussions amongst BMC staff that have identified a potential need for dedicated BMC legal counsel. To date, the BMC has relied upon legal input and advice from legal counsel representing the individual BMC parties. However, this presents a challenge as individual party legal counsel must represent their respective party and can make it difficult to provide legal advice specifically for the BMC. Contracting with dedicated BMC legal counsel would help address this issue and assist the executive director in complying with rules and regulations established for the BMC. However, to reduce costs to the BMC parties, the BMC staff proposes to continue to rely upon input from BMC party legal counsel for the majority of legal input and advice that is needed, but to also include a contingency budget item in the calendar year 2022 budget for dedicated BMC legal counsel and solicit legal firms that could be accessed under circumstances where BMC specific legal input / advice is needed. And we can talk about that more in the item 9A, the proposed calendar year 2022 budget. And then with respect to land use, we have the update from the county on the Title 19 retrofit to build program evaluation. One consultant proposal was received in response to the RFP, and the county is waiting on state grant funding to execute the contract and post a project timeline. The community plan is currently under review by the Coastal Commission. However, a hearing date is not yet scheduled. In the meantime, the county is meeting with BMC really party staff to discuss potential policy changes. We have some updated numbers, or at least current numbers as of the October 27th BMC meeting for Los Osos wastewater recovery facility, wastewater and recycled water flows. And then just a note about the county approved using $350,000 in funding from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 to connect new users to the Los Osos recycled water system. And those new users are anticipated to be the schools, starting with the Los Osos Middle School. And that concludes my executive director's report. Available for any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions of Daniel?
Marshall, this is Mark. I'll hold my questions until after public comment.
After public comment,
Yeah.
okay. All right, well, seeing no comments now, let's go to public comment then, Laura, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I wanted to speak to the ED report. It's become kind of an outdated document, and there are also a lot of misstatements, and I'm going to go over it real quickly to give you some examples. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is this transient model. And we've heard from the supervisor that the Sigma basins are getting all this general fund money. It's time for the county to step up and fund the entire transient model. Forget the grant application. Let's conserve staff time in that regard. County, please step up and pay for it. Then we have basin plan implementation and funding plans. Well, we already heard that you guys agreed to hire SCI. I think that's going nowhere, but I won't spend time on that. But probably one of the most fundamental questions in terms of basin plan implementation we have before us right now is the question of a third program C well. And that should be up front and foremost now that we have the number 2 program C well. We'll hear about that a little later. But given the reduction in sustainable yield to 2380, the program C number 3 wells become an imperative in my view. And I would hope that the ED starts to talk about that and so forth. Then in going further into the ED report, the Program B implementation process and funding. This talks about the Golden State Water Company facility over on Rosina and the prospects for that facility to become a community project, a community denitrification project. Well, the chances of that are about 1 in a million. So that ought to be stricken from the ED report. Then we go to the retrofit to build Title 19 program, and we could be waiting for months or well into next year for the state to provide the funding. Again, why doesn't the county step up, pay the $50,000? That's all it is to update the Title 19. $50,000. The county should put the money up and recoup it when the state comes through with the money, if and when they do. This is a perfect example of a nickel holding up a buck. Why are we doing that? And then, this report needs to be reformatted. And I would also like to ask that these working group or staff meetings are more fully documented, because it appears that the staff meetings, they're actually making decisions that your board or your committee ought to be making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. It seems as though most of the things that are being
Oh, goodness.
What happened?
Keith, I apologize. Please unmute yourself and you can start over. I made a mistake. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you. I see my clock is still running though. There you go. Thank you. It seems like most of what's being discussed in this ED report are studies and reviews of actions rather than actions. So I'd like to try to convince the board that more actions need to be taken, and I'll make some recommendations a little later. Grant funding for the 8th and El Morro Stormwater Recovery Plan should be pursued and the project should be implemented. It's a no-brainer, perfect candidate for a successful grant. It stops runoff now polluting the estuary and it charges the groundwater. What are the negatives to this? Let's just get this done. I strongly suggest that all grant opportunities and other funding options are considered to deal with the PFAS chemicals. As mentioned, Atascadero is suing the companies that make them. If necessary, the water recycle program grant should be considered for this. Other good uses for the grant money include stormwater and perch water recovery. You've listed that one. And a plan to stop seawater intrusion in Zone E, possibly with injection wells using water sources within the basin. Regarding the basin metric evaluation, I wanted to check to make sure staff plans to present the Cleeth Harris evaluation next month as planned. Regarding the wellhead survey, I'm wondering when the results will be available to the public. Regarding the lower aquifer monitoring evaluation, the item as written still suggests that only one new well may be recommended. I'm sorry, but just one new well will not allow monitoring to accurately track seawater intrusion conditions, period. Funding and organization structures regarding that, and I'm also covering Program B implementation to some extent. Please tell me when the public will be able to provide input into funding options so that the consultant considers the input. For instance, one alternative should include a funding option for infrastructure programs B and D and other programs to preserve the basin. And that funding should be not be assumed to be provided by new development or to support new development, because it may be needed to stop seawater intrusion, which is still continuing. Regarding Title 19, I'll say it again, the BMC should not support Title 19 because it undermines a BMC conservation program, which would be designed to reduce seawater intrusion. The Title 19 program is not designed for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself. Deborah?
Yes, thank you. Here I am. Deborah Howe, Los Osos Community Advisory Council Ad Hoc Water Committee. The Stormwater Resource Plan, 8th and El Moro project caught my attention. I wasn't successful in getting that information when I clicked on the resources. If you would indulge me by briefly explaining what that project entails, and if not, if you would point me to where I can find a full description so that I can report on this to LOCAC. Our meeting is tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again, Lindy Owen. I wanted to comment on the Title 19 corrections that are now, a year along? And because they were used to decide how much the ratio would be for retrofitting for 7 years now, 6 years, 7 years. It'd be interesting to calculate how much water. It was acknowledged that it is incorrect and that there are different amounts that should be put in place. Again, if the county is going to be using this county-wide, that should come out of the general fund and it should be done now. It's ridiculous to keep postponing this. We're trying to see how much water we have in our basin and how many new homes can come in here. You can't do that until you correct that data out of the Title 19 numbers. And I urge that get put on a priority list. We shouldn't be waiting years for that. We shouldn't be waiting years to find out how to monitor the private wells for their usage. These are parts of sustainability in our basin, and that's what you're here for. So I hate to complain, but I'm really tired of watching it be postponed constantly. So those are my comments. I mean, let's get on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, well, close public comment. I guess it's just receive and file. Is there any direction from the committee to Daniel for future discussions in his executive director's report?
I think Mark had one and I have one as well. Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Supervisor. So regarding the WRFP grant, in the executive director's report, we talked about it for the recycled water use, but then it's also discussed in our one of our agenda items for the transient model. And just wondering if you can clarify if this or provide a better understanding of how this is connected. Is this a grant opportunity for several projects, or is it a total amount of what I understand is $150,000? If that goes towards the model, would there not be any for this recycled water, or I'm sorry, for the transient groundwater model? And then regarding the recycled water and the 350,000, can this be used towards our BMC budget? We have a line item for the beneficial use evaluation, and so do we need to have that line item in there and continue on with this work, or is this something that's going to be covered by I guess ultimately the county's work? So those are my two comments.
Thank you, Mark. Bruce.
Thanks, Marshall. Mine, I'll ask about legal counsel when we get to the budget. The short of that is that I do believe BMC should have its own separate legal counsel, and we have to be real clear what individual parties' counsel's role is. So let's talk about that more in budget. Mine was just sort of a follow-on to the revision of the basin yield metric. The reduction of that number raised the safe yield. The revision of the safe yield raised the basin yield metric to over 0.8. And so I think it appropriate to have at some point a discussion of adaptive management and what steps does the BMC see is going to reduce it back to 0.8 or less. I think whenever that could be scheduled, that would be great. Those are my 2 thoughts on that.
Thank you, Bruce. Charlie, you got anything here?
No, I think we'll bring some issues up at staff meetings, and I think that I can move to accept the executive director's report as written.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Bruce.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Daniel, you want to take a vote, please?
Do we need a roll call vote for the executive director's report?
Okay, well, it's hard to do with the Zoom.
Yeah.
You don't know if anybody's saying anything.
It's receive and file. I mean, and we've provided the direction. I think
Okay.
we're good.
Does anybody have any objection to receive and file?
No.
Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and receive and file the report. So let's move on to the action items. Item 9A, the preliminary calendar year 2022 Basin Management Committee budget. Daniel?
Thank you, Marshall. Let me pull up my notes here. So yes, as outlined in the Basin Management Committee rules and regulations, the BMC is directed to adopt an annual budget for the following year at the first BMC meeting following December 1st of the current year. And so to assist the BMC in adopting a budget for calendar year 2022, a preliminary calendar year 2022 budget has been provided for the BMC's review and input here today. It's anticipated that we will be bringing an actual proposed budget back to the BMC for more formal consideration at the December 15th BMC meeting. So again, this is just being brought forth as an opportunity to get some early input from the Basin Management Committee into items and initiatives that they would like to see in the calendar year 2022 budget. BMC staff and party staff can take that input and use it to craft and develop a proposed budget for calendar year 2022. That being said, there are a couple of items that we've included for consideration, and I think the first one is a dedicated BMC legal counsel contingency, as described in the executive director's report. The BMC specifically doesn't have its own legal counsel and historically has relied on legal input and advice from the BMC party legal counsel, and that has advantages in that it's a cost-saving measure for the BMC itself, but disadvantages as those parties are representing not just specifically the BMC, but also their individual parties. And so what was proposed or is being considered by the BMC staff and party staff is a sort of a compromise where we could continue to rely upon BMC party legal counsel for, routine and legal questions and procedural items, for example, Brown Act compliance, but at the same time put in a contingency budget that would allow the BMC staff to solicit sort of specific legal counsel, from a firm that doesn't represent any of the other BMC parties should the need arise. And so that this contingency would be available to solicit legal input from outside counsel, but wouldn't necessarily need to be utilized on a year-over-year basis if there weren't specific complicated or other questions that would require it. So we can talk about that some more. Then there were a couple of questions that came up with the in the executive director's report with respect to the transient groundwater model and the water recycling funding program study. So I'll just try to provide a kind of an overview of that here. The current estimate that we have maybe let's start with the funding available. So to develop a transient model, we have currently $150,000 that the county has budgeted for a transient model for the Los Osos groundwater basin. And we believe we have, and this is not a certainty, but the potential to receive an additional $150,000 in grant funding through a water recycling funding program planning grant. And so that would create a pool of approximately $300,000 to develop a transient model for the Los Osos Basin. However, the planning grant does have some other items that it requires to be eligible to receive that grant funding, which include development of, a planning grant report, evaluation of distant recycled water alternatives, as well as other supplemental supply alternatives, and some, reporting requirements as well. And so what is being proposed is that the BMC pursue both sources of funding to provide approximately $300,000 in outside funding to develop a transient model and use that model to evaluate different recycled water and other supplemental supply opportunities for the basin. The total budget for that roughly is estimated around $330,000. So a little bit more than the potential total funding available. So there could be some ancillary costs that the BMC would be required to fund out of its own its contributions from the individual parties, but that the majority of the costs would be covered by those two sources. The numbers that you're seeing in the staff report here today of $165,000 is really just represents half of the $330,000 and the $300,000 numbers that I just referenced, because it's envisioned that the development of a transient groundwater model likely is not going to get done in 1 year, and thus would span 2 BMC budget years. And so we've just cut it in half and included it into the budget for this year, with the assumption that in the calendar year 2023 budget, there would be another, $165,000 line item, but also another $150,000 of outside funding available to offset those costs to the BMC. There was a question about the recycled water beneficial use evaluation. That was an item that was included in the calendar year 2021 budget. We have not initiated that effort and don't intend to initiate that effort before the end of the year. And so therefore those funds will not be utilized in calendar year 2021, but that scope would get incorporated into the water recycling funding program planning study, as it is a very strong fit for what the Water Resource Control Board would want to see in a planning study. And then finally, the technical contingency, and this is really an item where I'd be looking to get input from the BMC. If we move down to 2 slides there, Laura. If we're targeting a total BMC budget that approximately resembles other budgets that we've seen in previous years, and actually is almost very, very close to the budget that was approved in calendar year 2021, a total of $314,000, then there's a potential technical contingency amount of $55,000 that could be available to fund other BMC initiatives in calendar year 2022. And this would be where I'd be very interested to get input from the Basin Management Committee. I've identified a couple of tasks that could potentially benefit from the use of those fundings that are follow-on tasks from initiatives that are currently underway, or tasks that were included in the BMC's strategic plan or implementation plan, but that weren't funded. in calendar year 2021. So several of these tasks include lower aquifer monitoring well improvements. As described earlier, the BMC funded the evaluation of potential lower aquifer monitoring improvements. And so that technical contingency funding could be made available to actually make those improvements, which would allow us to improve the quality of our groundwater monitoring network. Additionally, shown is funding an organizational study polling. So depending on the outcomes of the funding study that SCI will be preparing and the different funding options available and the different estimates of the potential assessment, that would, or fee that would be required to fund different initiatives, the BMC could consider utilizing surveys or other polling techniques to get a sense from the community on whether or not they thought that the community would be open to some form of assessment or establishment of a funding mechanism for ongoing BMC monitoring and management and or basin program implementation. Another option is a development of a more accurate or even just development of a Los Osos Creek stream gauge rating curve. We currently don't have an accurate rating curve for Los Osos Creek. Just for some people's benefit, a rating curve is a relationship between the water level in the creek and actually how much water is flowing by the creek at that time. And so it improves the understanding of how much water is flowing in the creek at any given time. And then the final one would be investigation of metering of private wells, looking into what would be the costs and requirements associated with that. So those are just a number of items that were included here because, again, they're either follow-on items to currently ongoing initiatives, or they're items that were included in the implementation plan that were not previously funded. Obviously, there's other items that could be included here, but I just wanted to at least provide those for the purposes of the discussion. And then, just this slide then shows just to help people work through this, the subtotal would be all the costs associated with tasks 1 through 10. Then the county and grant outside contributions are subtracted to create a total after reimbursement. Then a 10% contingency is applied to 28,000, and then that ultimately yields the total BMC budget or proposed or preliminary budget of 314,000. And then below that is the breakdown of that budget, if approved, for each of the individual BMC parties. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to the BMC for questions, comments, input. And again, we don't need to make decisions here today on the calendar year 2022 budget, but would like to initiate the conversations and get input for the purposes of streamlining this process moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, for the detailed discussion of the preliminary 2022 budget. Does anybody have discussion or questions before we go to public comment?
Just one quick clarification, if I could, Marshall, on the funding study that SCI is doing, that is from the 21 budget. All those monies are going to be expended under the 21 budget, so they don't show up at all on this budget. Have I got that correct?
That is the intent. And I'm working with SCI to be able to move this along as quickly as possible. So that is the outcome. There's a chance that it could extend a little bit, somewhat into 2022. But, I'm going to work with SCI to make sure that the majority of the funds are spent this year, and that, anything that may need to bleed over could be covered in calendar year 2022 contingency.
And that's, when we'll see the rollover funds, or however we account for it when we actually do the budget in January, right?
Correct.
Yep. Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go to public comment?
No.
Charlie?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, let's go to public comment, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, this is a repeat of what I just mentioned about the executive director's report. Virtually everything that's budgeted and planned is a study or review or going towards the model. So, and the model is supposed to take what, a couple of years to complete. So if you're going to use that to evaluate then the potential for other projects, I mean, when is it then that you really and actually be implementing mitigation programs? So I just have a concern that you're creating and wanting to create a sustainable basin on paper, but it's never going to actually be a sustainable basin because these programs are not going to be implemented in the foreseeable future. So here's a few that you could actually do that would move us towards a sustainable basin. Plan, fund, and approve new and upgraded monitoring wells to accurately track seawater intrusion and water levels and water quality basin-wide, including in the northern basin and central areas. These areas could be impacted by programs or climate change now, but there are few monitoring wells to accurately track conditions. They would also be used to figure out if your modeling is correct. And that's a huge omission in the way the methodology for the sustainable yield is being implemented now. Develop and implement clear, measurable, time-specific and protective goals and objectives, including interim objectives for assessing the state of the basin, the effects of programs, and the potential for further development. We need to have measurable data to tell if our basin is sustainable and has the potential for sustainability. Not more modeling. 3, develop and implement a basin-wide comprehensive indoor-outdoor conservation program, including on-site and off-site LID and stormwater capture and infiltration programs and measures. Develop and implement a plan to meter all wells. I noticed that in this contingency amount, this 45,000, Dan just mentioned that it's a study of metering private wells or an investigation. For goodness sakes, let's get on with it. Develop and implement a funding mechanism. This is number 5, funding mechanisms and incentives to ensure all users of the basin invest and participate equally in basin sustainability. I mean, when do you actually plan on implementing a funding mechanism? Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Lindy Owen, I have an odd question or clarification that I would appreciate. When I look at the breakdown of the money that is collected from the purveyors and passed on to the water users in their districts, I got to wondering, the county pays 20%, and that is basically covering the private wells. Now, do the private wells, they don't pay a penny towards our basin management, yet how are they funded through the county? So is the county using county funds to contribute to the basin management program? Because if it is, then it means that I, as a ratepayer, am paying for the basin management, and I'm also being charged through my taxes for the people outside the basin or outside the private wells. So that's double dipping, and I just don't think that has, it doesn't smell right. So could you clarify where the county gets the money to pay to cover their share, which is, I guess, the private well owners, and if anything, we probably lose services here for them to be able to cover 63,000 almost next year in the budget. I need that question answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to answer the questions. I think, Dan, you can start, and Bruce, you may be able to help a little bit.
Yeah, hey, Marshall, this is Mark. I was saving my comment till after. I don't, as far as the process of order, but I did have a couple of questions also.
Okay,
Just it, regarding the legal counsel, we, we've been operating for 6 years under our current status of using existing legal counsel from the parties, and I guess I didn't really catch the need. Yeah, it would be nice to have, but I don't know if anything's significant has come before us where we've really needed to have this. One, if we need to have more contingency, the fact that it's labeled as contingency on there is, I would like to know what that exact need is, and budget accordingly. If we need to increase our contingency, we have a line item for that. And so one recommendation would be to put additional funds in our contingency, and then if something does arise, but didn't really get a good understanding of what that need is, and what's not working today. And then as far as the study and the groundwater model, we talked about this last meeting, and what I thought we approved was to support, but it wouldn't be a BMC actual project. The fact that we're funding this in our budget or approving this amount of money wasn't what I understood that we were going to do. But there was going to be some additional funds needed for peer review and certain actions that we needed to do, but those were going to be somewhere in the ballpark of around $15,000 is what I had in my notes. So not sure how we got to this, and just the fact that it's this is a significant item. I think it requires additional analysis to fully understand what is the cost of this transient model. What are our benefits? Yeah, I agree. It's a tool. It would be a great tool to have in our tool belt, but is it the most important and pressing issue before us? I don't know. I haven't seen that, and don't have that clear understanding. So I would like to see this item come back. What is the total cost of this model? This is just a 1-year budget, and so I've heard ranges from $300,000 to $500,000. How do we get there? I'd like to see this grant funding be secured before the basin management starts putting funding towards the effort. And so a better cost analysis and projection of not only the annual budget, but the total cost to complete the project. And then the technical contingency, it is just it is a review of our existing work, and so I was struggling with that part of it also. Once again, it's listed as contingency and not a clear direction of where we're going to go in the upcoming year. One item, I'm not sure if it's a typo, but it lists 45,000 in the budget item table that describes it, but then 55,000 in the actual budget annual budget table. So probably need to clarify which one is it, the 45 or 55. But overall, would like to understand what exactly this is going to be used for. Would like to see some of this stuff, project based, but overall, we have to understand that these projects right now are being funded through the purveyors and the ratepayers. The intent of the BMC was to have a funding mechanism in place that we could spread across the beneficial users of the basin, and it would be funded by all the users of the basin. I think that if we're going to do any more studies and spend money on some of these review of studies, that needs to become paramount. We need to understand what funding do we have available, and how are those funding mechanisms going to be achieved? Because if it is going to be through the purveyors, we need to understand that and understand the limitations of that, because I see a lot of interaction between basin management but there is not that consensus on the funding mechanism. So I would like to see if we are going to do some review of past work. I know we have the SCI work in place. One suggestion is that we have a line item to further facilitate that activity, because that is going to really drive how we move the Basin Management Committee forward and what we're going to be able to accomplish in 2022. So that concludes my comments and of what I had.
I think those are good comments for inclusion in the discussion when we actually bring the budget back for adoption.
And Marshall, this is Bruce. I'm ready to speak to each of those because I think they are fundamental here.
Okay, if you could do that.
I would respond.
Let me, before you start going, Bruce, but I'm going to have to step away after this item because I didn't anticipate the meeting going this late. So
let's rev it up. This is not the final. This is not the final action on the budget. So let's see if we can move this quickly. First of all, I would tell you that getting this basin managed with a transient groundwater model is the most pressing technical need we have. We've talked about it for months, and in particular, it is the proper level of sophistication. It is the state of the art in allowing us to make the requisite adaptive management decisions. We're using outdated technology in the steady state model. And I look at this and I'm sort of surprised there's any question. I mean, the county is coming forward with $150,000 above and beyond our normal budget contributions here, because that is one of the roles of the flood control district in managing groundwater resources all over the county. We have, it seems to be an almost certain lock on another $150,000 of state grant money. And that opportunity to have those funds brought to bear on the issues that this committee is charged with dealing with, to me is extraordinary. I think with Dan's explanation, I think the total project cost is well understood. It is $330,000 to get the transient model up, running, calibrated, peer-reviewed, and otherwise ready to absolutely serve the needs of managing this resource, of which 300,000 is covered by funds that are, let's call them one time. And so there's a $30,000 net $30,000 over 2 years, so $15,000 a year being asked of the participants as a whole to make this project whole. And so I don't think there's any question about it. And if there is, maybe we could have staff of the parties discuss that as we head toward the final budget consideration in January. The second thing is legal counsel for the BMC. The county feels very strongly that the BMC should retain its own legal counsel, and there's two parts of that. I think the issue of most concern is that from the county's perspective, our county counsel is here to represent the interests of the county. And by saying that, I'm not suggesting that those interests diverge at all from those of the BMC as a whole. We worked cooperatively for many years, and I expect we will for many more. But county counsel's charge, as a department of the county, They are there to represent the Board of Supervisors. They have extended themselves to get the BMC going, coming out of the ISJ, the stipulated judgment, development of the basin plan. But they are increasingly uncomfortable that that's not what they should be doing long term. And so I guess the way we look at it from the county is that retaining counsel for the BMC is simply a cost of doing the job that we're here to do. And the, you know, so if it's $20,000, I wouldn't put it as a contingency budget here. My suggestion is that we need to budget for it. And, you know, maybe again, counsel for Golden State, county council for, LOCSD and S&T could get together to get an idea of what that really would cost. And it's just, if it's a little bit of extra money, that's what we're going to have to pay in our view. The other thing is, I think a lesser, at least in my instance, in my mind, is a lesser thing, and that is that county council has been providing their services to the BMC as an in-kind donation above and beyond our 20% contribution. And that's fine as we've gotten this thing going. But long term, that does drain resources from the county. It is not compensated. Again, I don't want to make a big deal about it. And then to the technical contingency, in the way I heard Dan explain this, we're targeting about the same level of, let's call it, operating budget that we usually have. And that's that total number of 314,000 and change. Again, take away the one-time costs of putting this transient model in place. The way I look at the technical contingency is it is the pot of money from which we can decide what the most pressing technical needs are in 2022. And you'll recall we did that, I want to say this year, or maybe it was late 2020, where we had, again, BMC party staff get together and look at different technical things like the wellhead survey, like I'm trying to remember the question of transducers for the Broderson Mound, a number of different things, and they went ahead and ranked those things. So the way I look at it is, out of that $55,000, we should put it in the budget, and we should then schedule an item to line out the possible tasks that would fund, and then rate those against how we think that they're going to provide benefit. So I think in its whole, I think that those would be my comments for things to talk about between now and when we pass it. And perhaps the biggest one is the question of adjusting just how much we need to budget for counsel to the BMC itself. Thanks, Marshall.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah,
Marshall, if I could just comment back, because I agree with a lot of what Supervisor Gibson's commenting on. It's just the fact, regarding the legal, do we need that in what was presented in the agenda package and described by Dan? It didn't explain what that need is today. So we most likely do need it, but it is right now the time for that, I guess. What we've been doing has been working, and what I asked for in my comment is just clarity on what are those specific needs, what's before us that we're projecting in 2022, because that would be something that if we had our basin-wide funding mechanism could be covered, and simply, that I agree that, we should have that person in place, but there's a cost to that. There's a cost for getting that person up to speed. And my question is right now, is that the time? And then regarding the transient model and the project, I agree that's an important tool to have, but what I wanted to understand is a breakdown of the project and what those costs were. You explained the 150 county match, the 150 grant, and then this 30,000. That's my understanding too. When I read the report and the explanation I got, it wasn't that clear for me. It was very confusion and how it's even listed in the table. So coming back when we talk about this next time, I'd like to see that in a written form a little more clear. And then just as far as the contingency, we did a lot of work this year. We should have that table and we should be able to line item those. I guess the part I was struggling for, it's not the money and the amount that we budget for these projects. It's the clarity on what these projects are and what the outcome of those. So in agreement. I mean, I'm not saying that none of this, I think overall we're in agreement. I'm just asking when this comes back before us in December or January, we can have a little more clarity on these items.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
That's great. And if I could just respond to one thing there, Marshall, the county's feeling is that the system of legal counsel that we have right now is coming to the end of its time. And
okay.
so,
Bruce, I think you've made that comment.
Yeah, well, I just want to be clear as we go forward. So I get it. Let's get the clarity, and I think we can get through this.
Yeah, and I agree that the two most pending things are the transient model, and I agree that we do need to have separate legal counsel because each of the parties is providing legal counsel, and I'd rather have independent legal counsel just representing the management committee rather than Golden State or us or the county or whoever. So I'm totally fine with doing that at this point in time. So do we have any other direction for Daniel? Because I'm going to have to step away from the meeting, and Chuck's going to take my place, and then Mark, you'll be the chair. No additional comments?
No, only that at S&T, we look forward to seeing the better fleshed out budget at the next meeting.
No pun intended by better flushed out.
I did say fleshed. Yeah, yes.
Okay, so excuse me. With that, we're done with item 9A. And Daniel, I think you got some good direction. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to us. And then, like I said, I hadn't anticipated the meeting going this late. Otherwise, we would have started at 1 again. So I'm going to have to step away, and then Chuck is going to take my place. And then Mark, you're taking over as the chair.
Okay, sounds good. Marshall, regarding 9B, Dan is presenting on that, or is that going to be Chuck? Since this is a program.
No. It's Dan.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Marshall. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. Sorry I have to step away, but sometimes things happen.
Yeah. Okay, moving forward on to item 9B, the Los Osos CSD Program C well minor use permits. Dan?
Thank you, Director Zimmer. Yeah, so item 9B before us is the county is requesting that the BMC review the Los Osos CSD's application for its what we're calling the program C well, and specifically review the minor use permit and make a recommendation regarding the approval of the project. And so just a little of the background, the CSD has applied for a minor use permit or coastal development permit for construction of a new municipal production well near Bay Oaks Drive and South Bay Boulevard. We can go to the next slide. So here's an aerial image of the proposed location for the well. It's near the intersection of Bay Oaks Drive and South Bay Boulevard, as shown in red there at the bottom of that aerial image. This well is anticipated to be drilled to a depth of 700 feet deep and tapped into zones D and E, with the goal the goal of all the program C wells is shifting lower aquifer pumping from the western portion of the basin to the central portion of the basin, and having the benefit of reducing the impacts on seawater intrusion. This well is anticipated to pump between 100 and 200 acre feet per year, and with the benefit again of offsetting LOCSD pumping from other wells located in the western portion of the basin. There's quite a bit of additional information provided in the permit application and the associated attachments, including a site map here, just kind of showing a proposed or preliminary layout for this second program C well. And Ron Munns with the CSD is available to answer any, other or additional specific questions with respect to the CSD's project.
Okay,
that-
thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Are there any board member comments or questions before we go to public comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to public comment.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. The LOSG supports adding the second Program C expansion well and installing all the most cost-effective measures, including more expansion wells as soon as possible, to stop and reverse seawater intrusion and provide a sustainable water supply for the current population. In other words, we support the first immediate goal of the basin plan. Seawater intrusion continues. The group doesn't want to draw out this process, but since the basin plan didn't have an EIR, individual projects must now be thorough to avoid negative impacts and unintended consequences, including irreparable harm to the basin-sensitive habitat. All the potential impacts on the basin and dependent aquatic resources are based on the model, which hasn't had an uncertainties analysis or been updated or peer reviewed. This should be done, but in the meantime, the review should evaluate a broader range of groundwater related potential impacts and additional less than best case scenarios and possible mitigations. Here are some of the groundwater related impacts and reviews that seem to be missing and needed. Potential adverse impacts on flows to aquatic ESHA at Willow Creek and Los Osos Creek. The proposed well is relatively near Willow Creek and the lower aquifers outcrop near Los Osos Creek. Both of these areas can be impacted. The review of these impacts should factor in the reduction in water being discharged into Bay Ridge Estates leach fields, which is supposed to support Willow Creek ESHA. The potential cumulative impacts on all supply wells and all private wells in the area, including future expansion wells, should be further analyzed and mitigated. The most recent water level contour maps in the annual reports appear to show the large pumping depression getting larger and extending further east, all the way to Los Osos Creek. This may be due to more pumping from the lower aquifer from private wells in the area, and it could affect ESHA, so it should be considered. The review should also consider exactly how much the well could adversely affect the severe seawater intrusion in Zone E, and should consider that Zone E is smaller than originally believed, as shown by the CSD's first attempt to install an expansion well near the middle school. The impacts on this well should also be, the impacts of PFAS on this well should also be considered. The well is relatively close to Bay Ridge Extension leach fields and may be a source of PFAS, which may be a source of PFAS. The LSG has requested that the BMC add more monitoring wells in the central area where expansion wells are planned to better track water levels and other conditions and to be able to respond to adverse impacts. This should be included in mitigation measures along with time-specific plans. Thank you.
Keith, you've reached your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. My name is Jeff Edwards, and as the Program C #2 well, I certainly support this facility. I will say that we heard from Mr. Heimel that the yield expected from the well was going to be between 100 and 200 acre feet per year, and I think that's overstated, frankly. And Cleith Harris Group actually did a memo, a tech memo on that. And it's my understanding that the expected yield from that facility is about 80 acre feet, and it could be less. It's not in the most ideal zone. It's cut off from the creek compartment. And as a result, the yield will be limited, which underscores what I mentioned earlier, and that is the need for the third program C well. And I'm pleased to hear the sustainability group supports both the program C number 2 and number 3 wells. I'll note that that concerns about aquatic flows and private wells may be misplaced, in that you heard that this well at 700 feet in depth is in the zones D and possibly E. Virtually all of the private wells in Los Osos, frankly, are in zone C. So I don't see any issues there. And also the aquatic flows are from perched groundwater and also zone C. So there was a comment period for the initial study and the mitigated negative declaration that was released. That comment period is long closed. So I'm hopeful this moves quickly through the MUP CDP process and can be built sometime next year. Thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Laura. We'll bring it back to the board. Any additional questions or comments on this item?
No, just a comment to my friends at the LOCSD. If they need any help with liaison to the county planning department and hearing process, they are more than welcome to contact my office. We'll make sure that this goes as smoothly as it can.
Thank you.
S&T has no comments, but we would like to congratulate the CSD on getting this far through the project, and we appreciate what you're doing for the community.
Thank you, Charlie. Chuck, any comments?
Thank you for your support. This is a long time coming, and it's nice to check these off the list.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, Mark, it looks like the recommendation is to potentially recommend approval of the project to the county. I'm going to abstain on voting on that motion, and simply because should it come before the Board of Supervisors, it would be on appeal, and I have to assume a quasi-judicial role there, which means open mind, waiting to see evidence that comes before me. So I just wanted to explain that.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. And I believe that Chuck would also sustain on this one also?
I don't see the need, because again, this is a question of recommending a project approval to a county permit process. And so Chuck is the applicant.
Okay.
Right. We're not part of the approval process. So I would gladly make a motion to move this along.
Okay, let's hear it, Chuck.
And before we move forward, I think there's a little bit more specificity requested in reviewing the new project referral or summary. We look at page 25 of the agenda packet. It's part 1. Is the attached information adequate to complete your review? I guess I would propose that the BMC would approve, say yes. Part 2, are there any significant concerns, problems, or impacts in your area of review? Based on the dialogue, potentially the BMC would say no. And then finally, the third part is indicate your recommendation for final action. And I think that would be where the BMC would recommend the project for approval.
So Dan, if I understand correctly, we need to complete this form and submit it. Is that correct?
That's what's been requested, as far as I can tell, in reviewing the form.
And I would submit that the basic motion for approval figuratively checks the appropriate boxes on that.
That was my intent.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah, the BMC is not the applicant. I'd like to make a motion to, as it says in the recommendation memo that precedes all this, that the BMC recommend the project approval to the county.
Okay. And Chuck, will you second that?
I will second that.
Sounds good. All right. That concludes 9B, 9C.
But do we need to do a roll call on that?
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be
Okay,
good to do
let's
that.
do it. Let's do a roll call on it.
Director Cody,
Yes,
Director Zimmer.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I guess Chair Zimmer technically, but yes. And then Director Susana.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 3-0.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Agenda item 9C, we've already covered, so that brings us to adjournment. Thank you, everybody, for joining the meeting. Appreciate it. Till the next time.
All right, we'll see you guys. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
have a
you.
good day. Bye.